Okay, so I'll put this up on YouTube after. But anyway, okay. So before we get started, Aaron Frost and Axel Rushmeyer, they created the original workshop repo that we're going to be basing this morning portion on. And so these are the tests that you'll be writing to validate your knowledge of ES6. And so they created the original one. I added a whole bunch on top of it, and I also migrated it from Jest to Mocha because I don't really like Jest and it's really slow. So Luke Hoban or Hoban, do I need the mic? No? I guess so.
There's a wireless one, you can just flip it on and it should do the speakers again.
Okay, great. I might use it this afternoon. So yeah, Luke Hoban, I'm not sure, I should have asked him. He created a repo called ES6 Features, which is fantastic. And several of our examples today are using his repo. And then Sebastian McKenzie created Babel. Who knows what Babel is? Okay, great. Who's used Babel? Who uses it every day? Okay, great. Are you guys React developers? Yeah? Yeah. So if you're a React developer, actually, who's using the original JSX transformer for React? Yeah, pretty much nobody. And neither is Facebook anymore. So if you are, stop. Because, yeah, you're not getting any help from Facebook anymore. Facebook's now using Babel. So Babel will transpile JSX for React, but its original purpose and something it does extremely well at is transpiling ES6 to ES5 and ES7 even to ES5. So actually, I totally spaced. Some of you, I would be surprised if you're here that you don't know what ES6 is, but I'll just give a quick explanation. So ES6 stands for ECMAScript 6. You also may have heard of it as ES 2015 because it has actually been recently renamed to coincide with the year of the release. Just kind of denoting a fact that every year there will be a new release of the specification with sweet new features and whatever. But yeah, so today our browsers all run ES5, technically 5.1, unless you're running IE8. Anybody running IE8? Good. Great.
Support it.
Yeah. So if you have to support IE8, you can actually still do that and write ES6. So hooray, thank you, Babel. So yeah, all of our browsers are running 5.1. There is a compatibility table I have linked at the end of the slides, and that shows how much support each browser has for ES6 and ES7 or ES 2016. And so yeah, it's ES6, or the ECMAScript specification is the specification upon which JavaScript is implemented. And so that's what we're learning about today. Sorry. Okay, so back to slides. So we're going to, who in here was the one who asked me to add cat gifs to my, yeah, there you go. There's actually another one. So yeah, to get us started, I don't want to put you to sleep. And it's early in the morning. Many of you have traveled, some from the UK. And so we're going to do a little activity to wake ourselves up. And if you've been to one of my talks before, you know what's going to happen. Everybody please stand up. Hopefully that keeps you awake. We'll probably do that again this afternoon after you've stuffed yourselves full of lunch. Okay, so just to set expectations here on this workshop, and sorry there's so much intro stuff, but heck, this is 6 hours long, so yeah. This is not a demo of every single feature available in ES6. There are many features, and some of them are not polyfillable, and so until it's actually implemented in all the browsers you need to support, you can't actually use it. And so that's not really practical. As cool as it is to know about these features, and I recommend that you look into them, you will be using them in the future, or at least lower level abstractions will be. It's not practical for you today, and I'm not as interested in teaching you all of the cool new things. I'm more interested in things that you can use today. And so my goal for this presentation, or for this workshop rather, is that you learn things that you need to do so you can go back to your project and implement it and start using ES6 in your project. So I'm also not a member of the TC39, the technical community responsible for designing the specification for JavaScript, and I'm not an avid spec reader. I do read specs occasionally. But yeah, let's just set that up right there. I may not know the answers to all of your questions. This is also not a step-by-step guide for exactly how you yourself should implement it in your own project. Projects are so very different. I will give an example that should be generally applicable, but yeah. And then it's also not boring and hands-off. So if you came here to sleep, you can get out. No, just kidding. Stay, like, snooze, just don't snore. This workshop is a demo of most of the practical features. I am a coder and I've been using ES6 for almost 8 months full-time in production. You can totally do this, and it's awesome. The idea is to give you the tools that you need to implement this into your project, even though the project that we'll be migrating may not look exactly like yours does. I hope it doesn't look exactly like yours does, because that would be painful. And then this is supposed to be interactive, exciting, and fun. So you will be on your keyboard typing away, making test pass, and migrating an app. We'll be working through this together. There will definitely be times where I will stop talking and you will just be working on your computer, and I'll run around and help answer questions. Okay? So this is how it's going to work. We're going to learn a feature. We're going to take the repo that the ES6 repo, or the workshop repo, and you're going to make some tests pass to using these ES6 features, and then we're going to do that again for all the features that we're going to be learning today. And then in the afternoon, hopefully if I get my timing right, we'll be upgrading the To-Do MVC app to ES6. Who's familiar with To-Do MVC? Okay, so this app was created by a couple of really cool people to help people compare different frameworks. And so it's implemented like exact same features in all these different frameworks. There are like 20 frameworks. And one of the frameworks is Vanilla.js. Who knows what Vanilla.js is? Yeah, it's just JavaScript. That's not a framework. So no, there's one file. It has no lines of code in it. You include that in your project and you're using Vanilla.js. So we're going to use the Vanilla.js version, and we will migrate it to use ES6. And it is going to be fantastic, and we'll make money. So let's go ahead and get started. This is what you need to do to get yourself set up. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, yes, it will. So luckily we will be talking about a feature first. Yeah, make sure that you actually get that started. Thank you, because you will be installing several tools, and we do have really awesome internet, but it's not that awesome. So, okay, so this is the way that it's going to work. We have this Babel iframe in my slides, and Babel is the transpiler that we use from ES6 to ES5. It actually used to be called 6 to 5, but that doesn't make sense because next year they're going to have to change their name to 7 to 6 or 5, and so they changed it to Babel, referencing the Tower of Babel. Anyway, so let and const. Oh, and on the right you see the transpiled code. On the left you see our code, the code that we write. And then down here in the bottom you'll see any output. So if I say console.log hi, then you'll see the output there. And if I have some sort of like weird transpilation error, you'll see that on this side. Okay, so now that we're all super familiar with Babel, I checked this at the beginning of the workshop, or before the workshop started, but can anybody not see my screen? Okay. You didn't answer, but I'm still going to zoom in. So, so here we go. I'm less interested in you guys knowing what the transpiled output looks like. If you are interested, feel free to open it up in your browser. Who's familiar with the problems with var? Or some, like the tricky things with var? Okay, so I'll just quickly give like the canonical example of why var is tricky. So in most languages, variables have block scoping, and a block is just something like that. That's a block. You can actually, this is totally valid in JavaScript. And so more commonly you'll see a block as if statement, then, and so that's your block. So I'm going to create a block here for a for loop, and I'll say var I equals 0, I is less than 5, and then I plus plus. All right, for loop. Then we're going to create an array here of our callbacks is an array, and we'll say callbacks.push our callback. And all that we want to do is we want to log I. So what I'm expecting to see is I want to have it log 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if I say callbacks.for each, and then we're just going to call the callback. And what? Oh my gosh, what's happening here? It's logging 5. Why is it logging 5? Anybody want to volunteer that? Why is it not logging 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? This
For block isn't scoped.
Yes, exactly. So, very good. So at this point in time, I say at this point in time, I is 5. And so this, of course, when I invoke the callback, it is going to log I at whatever I is at that point in time. So this function is not actually invoked until after I has been set to 5. Make sense? So block scoping helps us tremendously with this. And all that we need to do is say let. Let is pretty much equivalent to var, except it is now block scoped. And so now with this console.log, we get I is not defined because it is not inside of this for loop block. So if I comment that out, now we're going to get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let was created to solve this problem with var. And const was created to allow you to assign a variable that, or a variable name that can never be reassigned to anything else. So for example, we have this function f, and we're invoking it down here. And we have a block in here where we declare a variable let x. And then we declare another variable const x and call it sneaky. And this is okay because they're in different blocks. And so they exist in a different scope. And not an angular scope. Forget angular scope. This has nothing to do with angular scope. So with const, you cannot reassign the variable. You'll get a transpilation error. And actually, in most browsers, I think let and const have been implemented in most modern browsers. And so you will see this if you actually use this today. It will throw an error. And so the transpiler throws an error as well. And then also, let still behaves the same as var in that you can't redeclare the same variable. So the only thing that you're getting on top of var is block scoping. And that's super, super awesome. So does anybody have any questions about this before I set you loose to go test this? Okay, great. So let's go ahead and hopefully npm install has completed. And now what you want to do, oops, I was testing this out. Okay, so if you have it, you've already run npm install and everything, then run npm start. And this will start all of the tests for you, and it'll watch, and it's awesome, and it uses Mocha, which is great. So the way that this project works, let me zoom in on this. You have your test directory, and then you have your test final directory. You will notice these have the exact same files in them, except the test final is what your test should look like when they're done. So if you get stuck, you can use the test final directories version and figure out what you may be doing wrong. But don't use that as a crutch. Like, try to actually learn this stuff. So also, some of these tests will seem like extremely easy. And that's okay. The idea is to make sure, or have you validate your assumptions about these features. So, does anybody have any questions? Oh, and sorry, one other thing. I recommend that when you start in a file, you put a .only on your describe, and that will make it so it runs only the files within that, or only the tests within that describe block. So we're describing the block scope variables feature. And then each one of these its has a .skip saying don't actually run this test, but you notice it's still actually registered. So you just, when you're ready to start testing something out, you just remove the skip, And because I have this only, it'll only run these. I remove the skip, so it'll run this, and I hit save, and now I'm getting the failing test. And now my task is to make this test pass. Anybody have questions about how this works? Oh yes, good question. So your editor may not be enabled to use ES6, and so you're probably looking at crazy syntax and like bad completion. So in WebStorm, if you open up the preferences, command comma, or I don't know what it is for Windows, or no, but go into your preferences wherever that is, and go to languages and frameworks, and go to JavaScript, and then change it to ECMAScript 6. And if you find a way to make that the default for every single new project, please tell me, because this is really annoying. I do this with every project. With Sublime, there's a package. With Atom, there's a package. With Vim, I'm sure there's a plugin. With Emacs, you're on your own. I'm just kidding. I'm sure there's something there too. Recording. Woo! So that's let and const, and those are the tests. Hooray! So template literals. These actually used to be called template strings. I wish that they still were, because template literal is confusing and not as obvious as template string. But all that it does is, in languages like Perl and I think Python, they have this really cool construct that lets you compose strings really naturally. So we finally get that in JavaScript, and this is actually implemented in Chrome. You could open up your DevTools and use it right now. And I think it's implemented in Firefox. I don't know about Safari. It's certainly implemented in Edge. Actually, fun fact, Edge is by far, or not by far, but it's leading all of the other browsers in ES6 implementation. What? Yeah, what year is it? And semicolons, because they still do matter. Actually, it's funny, Babel will insert the semicolon for you. So I'm not going to get into a war about semicolons, but I use semicolons in all my code. Yes, thank you, and do that again next time.
So I was thinking of bringing that up formally as a survey, because we also do Ruby PR, and one of the guys has decided to start a war and put an ES lit thing in that you couldn't have semicolons.
Nice.
So the JavaScript and Ruby can do the same.
Yeah, I'm alright with that. Like, I'm just so used to semicolons that it would take me a while to get used to that. So it really, like, you just need to be smart about certain things, because like with return statements, for example, the automatic semicolon insertion could just stick a semicolon right next to your return statement, and if like the stuff that you actually meant to return doesn't actually happen. So I'd rather just always use a semicolon, personally. But there are other things that I do that I'm just like, well, just be smart about it. So yeah, anyway. Okay, template literals are awesome. So here we have a greeting and a noun, hello world, and then we just very naturally, with backticks and $ and braces, create our string. And it's very obvious what this string actually results in. And so we can see our full greeting here. Interpolation is hello world. So that's cool, and I can say hello James and welcome to the US. Yay! So that is interpolation, and then we have multi-line strings. Yay! We have a string DOM in our JavaScript. Ah! Okay, don't worry about it. So like I said, I'm an Angular developer. All of my templates, almost all of my templates look like this, right in the JavaScript. Instead of template URL, I use template, and I just stick it right there. And there are so many good reasons to do that. If you're like, what, you're dumb, come talk to me later. I'll explain why. It's a really good idea to do that. And so, yeah, that's template literals. But there's one other thing about template literals that's actually very, very cool. And it's, but I still haven't found an actual real-life use case where I use it. So it's really cool, but yeah. If you find a really awesome use case, let me know, because I'd like to. So here's the deal. You have the syntax is you just have your regular template literal backticks, but right before it you stick a function. So translate here is a function, and it's just right next to the backtick. You're not invoking it, anything. This is special syntax for template literals. And what happens is that function is invoked with the actual literal part of the string. So like this div, this space, like this space here, all of that, the literal portions of the string. And then the interpolated parts, like the dollar curly brace stuff, is spread across the rest of the arguments. So you'd have this. Sorry, this is called the spread operator. It's available in Java if anybody used Java before, so it should be familiar. And I'm sure it's available in other languages. JavaScript's just catching up. But basically, all that you have is interpolation 1, interpolation 2, yada yada yada. That's really annoying, and so we just do spread or rest. Yeah, sorry, it's rest, not spread. It was rest, and then you get the rest. Okay, so I'm not going to delve into what this translate function does. This was me trying to contrive an example of why you would ever want to use a tagged template literal. But basically, we have some translations here. Hello is hello, your birthday is, and then in German as well. And then up here, I can change the language to DE. And hallo, can't see dots. I don't know how to speak German, but I think that's German. Google Translate tells me it's German. So yeah, so that's pretty cool. We can translate this, and based on my template or my tag, I take any interpolation that starts with T dot, and will take the remaining stuff and put that through my translations, and boom, you get the translation. It's kind of handy. Don't do this. There are other libraries that do this really, really great. And this is just a contrived example, as I explained. One other thing. So the tagging function, or the tagging function returns anything. You can have it return a function. You can have it return a number. It doesn't really matter what it returns. It doesn't have to be a string. And so, like so that's just something else that's kind of handy and interesting. Yes?
So what you use for this is indenting, because it will keep the indentation, but if you're using a template that you don't want to have the implementation, you can have it shifted over.
Yeah, that's a good example of a good implement or a use case if you don't want the indent. Anybody have questions about template literals? Yes? Oh, you mean within the curly braces?
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. So to get those inside of the interpolations, they need to be inside of those curly braces. So technically, for the template string to work, I don't need those to be in there at all, right? Essentially, without this translate tag, these are essentially identical. Because all that you're doing when you enter into this interpolation section is it's basically saying this is now JavaScript, and whatever this returns or evaluates to is I want you to stick right there. So you can actually call functions and all kinds of things in here. But so that I can have it in my interpolations, I need to put it inside of there, and then I can use that to determine what translation should go there. So it's like it's a implementation detail that you have to know to use this tag, which is one of the reasons you shouldn't actually do this. There are other libraries that do it much better. So, yeah.
Sorry, so was there something magical about G, or is that just...
No, that was just my thing. Yeah, I was worried that I was going to like throw you guys off with some implementation details about this, but yeah, there's nothing special about the T. It was just my way of saying if there's an interpolation that starts with T dot, that's a translation. So. Yep. Yeah. So the interpolations, it goes through this. I'll explain the translate. It's kind of interesting. We all like JavaScript. So you get your translate or your literal string, and this is actually an array of all of the sections between the interpolation parts. And so we for each over this. We get this actual string in the index, and I'm going to create a translated array here, and I'll push on the string, and then I'll check if the interpolation, if there's an interpolation at that same index, So you have like one array that's the actual literal strings, and then another that's the interpolation. So if there's like at index 0 there's a string, and then index 0 at the interpolations would be the interpolation after that one. And so if there is an interpolation, and if it's a string, and it starts with T dot, then it's a translation key. If it's not a string, or rather if it's not a translation key, then I just push the interpolation. For example, right here, this is not a translation, I just want that in my string, right? And then if it is a translation key, like t.hello, then I'm going to get all my translations for the specified language, so whatever that object is, and I will get the item for that interpolation. So hello, for example. So. Yes, oh, good. So this throws a lot of people off. Const does not mean immutable. Sort of sadly. Not entirely sadly, though. But what const means is cannot be reassigned. So if I say const x equals 42, then I can't say later x equals 34. So just means you can't reassign it. So if you assign it to a primitive, then you can consider that as immutable. But if you assign it to an object or an array of something, you can mutate it as much as you like.
So in this case, why
So that I enforce, or I force myself to not be able to reassign it, which leads to code that is a little bit harder to grok. So I prefer const. But sometimes I do use let. Yeah, there are use cases for reassignment, but not as many. Any other questions? Okay, so feel free to jump into your editor and go to, I'm just going to skip this guy. Go to the test 02 template literals. And make sure that you take the dot only off of your describe in the block scoping. And then back in your template literals, put a dot only on that describe and turn off the its one at a time. And you'll find that I have 6 friends. So that's fun. So I tweeted this last night that I was using these people as my friends in the example, and they started fighting over the index of themselves. So Ryan Florence was like, so I can call dot reverse on that, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is my wife, so of course she's number 1. And then the rest of these aren't in really any particular order, but it was suggested that it was hair length order, and that almost works, except for Joe Eames should probably be right here. Matt Zabriskie is probably close to position 0, but anyway, I digress. Yes? It's any JavaScript. So it's a good question. So the question is, what can you do inside of this literal or this interpolation? I can call a function, and that is totally valid. I can do map. I can go really crazy and just like blah 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 blah, and as long as I return something, or even if I don't return something, whatever is returned will be used in that position. So pretty crazy stuff. You'll see. Yeah, I would recommend that if you have anything complex in there, put it in a function just to keep things easier to read. Okay, I'm going to pause my recording. Yep, includes repeat. We repeat it 3 times. And yeah, so those are just a couple of the things that are on strings. I'm actually not certain of all of the cool things that were added on strings. You can go look it up later. But the idea of this is just to demonstrate, yes, there are new API features that you can use, and they're cool. And then for arrays, you can actually create an array from something that looks like an array, but isn't. For example, a node list. Who knew that document.querySelector, you give it a selector, returns a node list? That is not an array. Anybody like have frustrations with that, like that's super annoying. So you can actually very easily create an array from it without having to do array.prototype.crap. It's just array.from, and then you pass the thing that looks like an array. It basically has a length, and it has items in the array for that length. Let's see, I don't think it needs to have all of those items either. It just needs to have a length and well, that's it actually. If we take this off, now you just have null, whatever. So that's really handy. And then array.fill, so I create a new array of length 4, and I fill them with hey, except I start at index 2. And so you see it's null, hey. So that is cool. And then object.assign is awesome. You can take one object and then any number of other objects and have them merge up into that one object. So it makes doing like defaults really easy for like options in a function or something. Object.assign is pretty cool. But danger zone, it doesn't merge deeply. It just merges very shallowly. It's a shallow feature. So if we say like foo is an object of bar and high, and then in here we say foo is an object of baz and hey, what you're going to end up with is just baz and hey. You're not going to have bar high and baz hey together. Whereas like Lodash has its merge functionality that will actually merge those two objects together. So yep, that's some of the cool features. So go ahead and jump on to the tests. So don't forget to turn off the only from your template literals, go to your new APIs and turn on .only there, and then start unskipping the tests and making them pass. Anybody have questions? Sorry, I should have asked that before. Yeah?
I'm curious, one thing I always wish was there was the ability to do more URL stuff natively, like you mentioned Nodeless, but like location object.
Mm-hmm.
Is there,
I don't know. I haven't seen anything about the location object improvements in ES6. I'm pretty confident there aren't any improvements. And actually, the location object would be a W3 standard rather than an ECMA standard because it's actually just an API. So, any other questions? Great. So, the next subject is destructuring. Destructuring is really cool. It reduces the amount of bloat you have to have when you just want to get a bunch of properties off of objects, or arrays for that matter. So here we have an array, 1, 2, 3, and we only want the 0th and 2nd index properties off of that. And we'll assign those to A and B, and we console log those, and it's 1 and 3. So the idea is people got tired of doing this. Const array equals 1, 2, 3, and then const A equals array 0, and const B equals array 2. So that's basically, these are equivalent. You take 3 lines, can merge it down into 1. So it is just syntactic sugar. It has no special properties of any kind. So yeah, that's how you destructure an array. You just leave blank the things that you don't really care to assign it to anything. For objects, it's very much the same except with curly braces. And so we're pulling the name and type properties out of the animal. Keela is the name of not my dog, but my my sister-in-law's dog. And yeah, so we have Keela the dog. And then if you want to have your own custom variable name, so we have to pull out the name property out of animal, and by default we just call it the same name in our closure as it's called in the object. But if we don't want it to be called that for some reason, then we can assign it to our custom variable name. And so and also you can look at the output and it should be pretty obvious what's going on here. We just assign custom name to animal.name and custom type to animal.type, but we can do that all in a single line. And then this is also really handy in parameters. And so here I have this draw square, and its API is just give me an options configuration object or something. But then all I care about in this particular function are the top left and side length properties off of that object, and so I destructure those. And if you look here at the output, you have the draw square. We call this ref2 because ref was already taken in the closure, and Babel rocks. And so we pull up the top left and side length, and if I wanted to assign that to my own thing, I'd say foo, and the output would assign that to foo. And yeah, then we just call that with an object, and it just pulls those off. And then finally, it fails soft. So if the object doesn't have the property or the array doesn't have the property, then it will just be assigned to undefined. It will not throw an error. Thank heaven. That would have been such a pain in the rear. So, and then also, very, very handy is defaults. So if first is not defined in this array, and it is not, it's an empty array. So if the first item in the array is not defined, then we're going to assign it with 1. And so we get the value of first is 1. So that is destructuring. Does anybody have questions about destructuring? Great. Very handy feature. So let's go ahead and jump into the tests. Oh, excuse me. One thing that I didn't explain, but you're going to run into on the tests, is how to destructure destructured properties. So this is something that's like really crazy. I don't ever do it. I don't think I've ever done it, but it is kind of neat. So let me go back to the Babel. And here, if I have on my animal object, I have, I don't know, favorite bone. And this bone has a name, of course, and it is, I don't know, candy. And its length is 23, I don't know. So we want to be able to pull out the name and length properties off of the favorite bone property off of the animal. So how do we do this? Well, it's actually sort of simple. So we say const, and actually I'm going to change this from name just for simplicity, type. No, we already got a type 1. I don't care. So we're going to say favorite bone. So we'll destructure that, and then we'll pull out type 1 and length from animal. And we'll console.log type 1 and length. And there we go, candy 23. So this could get really crazy really fast. It's like, oh, but I want the length property off of this thing. And yeah, then things kind of get crazy. But it works. The length of type 1, which is candy, is 5. But yeah, then you get like curly brace craziness. And so I wouldn't recommend doing that. We want readable code. Yeah, try not to be too creative. So, any questions about that? Yeah.
So when you did that last example, you didn't actually make some variable called favorite bone, right? That's just to specify that it needs to go into that part.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it does. Pretty handy. Oh, and that's actually also another important thing to note is Babel, because, wait, hold on a second. There we go. Because of the way that destructuring objects works is if you have, like if you're pulling something out of an object where the sub-objects don't actually exist, then you're going to get a runtime error, which is no fun. So if you're destructuring destructured stuff, just be careful. Recording again. The module specification is slightly based off of module implementations like CommonJS or Require.js, if you're familiar with those. But it has a few differences. One major difference that you'll likely run into eventually is when you import something, when you or require, what you're getting isn't a value, it's an immutable binding to that value. So you can't reassign math, for instance, to anything else. And so that's just something to be aware of, because I've run into it and it cost me 15 minutes and I just took 1 minute explaining it, so you'll never run into it. Maybe. So the syntax is this. It's similar to other languages. You import something from some path to the other file relative to the current file. So if this were inside of a relative directory, that's how you would do it. It's very similar to CommonJS. And actually, there's shorthand instead of holy cow, what is wrong with me? This import star as math, you can just say import math from, and that will pull out the default export, which I recommend just using default exports for everything, just because I think it's easier to read. But yeah, then you can also sort of destructure properties out of what you're importing. So this isn't exactly like destructuring. It is actually quite different in its implementation, because what you're binding to an immutable or you have an immutable binding to that to the thing that you're pulling out. And so yeah, it's not exactly like destructuring, which makes me sad, because I believe you can't do you can't do this. So you can't reassign it to your own custom property name. I saved you another 5 minutes. There you go. Sorry, what? Yes, you can't say, oh, you mean destructure it and say as? Good question. As, hi. Yeah, can't do that either. Man, huge oversight in my mind. But when I tweeted about it, somebody was actually, I think it was Alan Worsbrox or maybe Caitlin, but people on the TC39 were like, well, write up a specification and drop, get it through the process. I'm like, I'd love to do that when I get time, aka never.
It might make it more confusing for other developers, but if you had two libraries that each had something called the same, you could screw it.
Totally. Yeah. What you would have to do is you'd say import foo from libmath, and then you'd say const hi equals foo.py. So it totally stinks. I hate it, but that's life. So I love JavaScript still. So it's hurt me so many times, but I still come back. So then for the export side of things, you can export from other, yes, sorry. Oh, sorry, you're right. And we even have a test for that. As hi. Yeah, and that works. And now I can't remember what the thing I ran into was. It is not destructuring. I just can't remember what the difference is now. Thank you for pointing that out. And we do have a test for that, so it was late. Okay, so for the export side of things, you say export star from some import, and this file is now exporting everything that file is exporting as well. And then you can also say, if you have something specific you want to export from this file, you say export default, calculate, and so then anybody who's importing this file, that's what they're going to get when they import by default. You can also say export calculate, and this is kind of messed up. Now, I'll be totally honest, I pretty much never just export something. I always do export default just because I think it's easier to read. So I apologize for my lack of knowledge of this particular piece. But you can export specific things. I think it's calculate. I don't remember. Maybe I should just look at the modules. Yeah, so you can have your export at the same place as the declaration. I think that's where my problem was. If we say export, calculate, yeah, you put it right there. So I'll quickly explain why I don't like this pattern, and that's because if you have a file with a ton of things that it needs to export, identifying what exactly your API to that module is becomes really difficult. And so especially if these especially if these things are really long, you have to look through the file, find all the places where it says export. Easier way is because function declarations like this are, let me make this big again, because function declarations are hoisted to the top of the closure, and unique to function declarations are not only is the declaration hoisted, but the definition is also hoisted. Hence, I can call calculate before I actually define it. So because of that, you can structure your code where all of the function declarations are at the bottom, and then at the top you just export default an object, and you can say calculate. And so now what you're getting is an object that has a calculate property off of it. And also because of something else that we're going to learn about, which is object literals, you don't have to do this. Hooray! You just have to do this. That's just shorthand. And then you can put anything else that you want exported on this module. And then when I come into this file and I'm going to maintain this file, I say, oh, this thing exports these things, and I don't have to search throughout the file to find it. So that's why I export default and just export an object, and life is easier. Have I not convinced some people? I think it's great.
You not do nothing. You can't do it with classes, though, right?
That is true. Yes, very good point. So classes, sadly but understandably, are not hoisted like functions. So they're hoisted like variables, and the reason for that, presumably, is when you extend a class, things would get kind of hairy if things could be classes could be hoisted, and yeah, there would be problems. So you can't do this with classes, but I don't care because I don't use classes. Ha! So, but if you did, what you'd have to do is export class foo, and that's what you have to do. And if you wanted it to be the default export, which I still recommend because I think having a default export makes it easier to understand. So yeah, let me explain the difference as far as the API is concerned. So if I were to import, let's say this is in a file and I want to import it, I'd say import foo, and I'd have to destructure foo out of my import from foo.js. And I get a big blow up because things are weird. But anyway, if you don't do default, then it actually gets added onto a sort of an object kind of thing that you have to destructure off of. But if that's the only thing that your module exports, then why force users of your module to have to destructure stuff? So just export default, and then you don't have to destructure it. And then you can call it whatever you want. Yeah?
What's the compelling case for doing the forced destructuring? Why would I want to force someone to name my thing a specific thing?
So a use case for that is if you are exporting two things, and you're not doing what I term as the newspaper code style, which is important stuff at the top, details at the bottom. If you put your exports throughout your file, then that would be a use case for not doing a default, and then people would have to destructure it out. And so this would be an example use case. But if I were to do this, what I would do is I would actually, because of my newspaper style that I like, I would actually put this in a function called getFoo, and I would simply return that class. Oops. And I would format it properly. But then I would export default foo, get foo. And so now the top of my file has all my exports. It's very easy. I can see right when I open the file. These are the things that I can use when I am using this module. And then if I'm interested in the actual implementation details, it's very easy for me to just follow this function and see, oh, this is what it's returned. And this is actually another reason I don't like classes, which we can talk about later, but it makes my preferred newspaper code style not possible. So that's kind of lame.
Why would you not do that? Like, that just seems that seems so much better to me to like let you import my library as whatever name you want, and then reference specific things on it that way. Like,
Yeah.
it seems somewhat. I don't know. It seems really like. My brain doesn't work.
Seems really dumb. Yep, I agree. So.
It seems too strict, like
Yeah.
Totalitarian.
Yeah, I agree. So, newspaper code style, you can Google it. I'm pretty sure I'd be the only result. I have a blog post about newspaper code style. Oh gosh, now I'm curious. Am I the only result? Newspaper code style. Oh no, I'm not. Medium? I'm not even on the first page. Oh my gosh. Add can't see dots then. There you go. Yeah, so you've got it's structure. Structure. There you go. Let's see if I'm the only result for that. There we go. I don't even know the title of my own blog post. But newspaper code structure will explain all of the reasoning for why I like to structure my modules the way that I do. So anyway, you don't have to do exactly what I do. I'm not trying to indoctrinate you, but you should anyway. So, so if I, let's see, there was one other thing here. Let me just refresh this guy. I wanted to demonstrate one other thing about this. Should have just refreshed the iframe. Coming out the exports above. So yeah, this calculate function runs. I'm importing my lib/math, and this is actually kind of magical because this is another thing I should explain. Babel will because there is no module syntax in the browsers today. Babel needs to transpile it. However, Babel does not ship with something like require.js or common.js and some bundling stuff. It leaves that to other tools that are better suited for that. And so what Babel transpiles it to is common.js syntax. And I think you can configure it to transpile to require.js. I don't know why you do that unless I guess you have something that is still running on require.js. Yeah, so I just implemented my own simple require function here so that this would actually work. And it just pulls out my math module. But yeah, so that is how that works. Does anybody have any other questions about modules in ES6? Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this is definitely one that people want to test. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go on to the next topic. I'll talk about that one, and then you can test both of them or one of them. That way we can get through quicker. So object literal. Does anybody have a problem with that? Like, you can go ahead and just start testing if you want. Object literals are pretty simple, just syntactic sugar, and really awesome. So basically, there are a couple of features, and actually they're not just syntactic sugar, I should say. One thing that object literal does is it allows you to define the prototype of an object before or on creation, which you can't normally do. So yeah, we have our prototype object here, which is kind of fun and whatever. And then shorthand, let me zoom in, make this bigger so you can actually see this. So what used to be really annoying, handler, you no longer have to do, it's just handler, and it will assume the name because this function has a name. And then method shorthands, and so you no longer have to do toString function toString because that's just too much to type, I guess. And so you no longer have to do this. It will assume exactly that. And supercalls, which is kind of handy too, because we're extending this prototype toString. So if I define toString here, then I would get that. And then computed dynamic property names. This is wild and awesome and can totally be taken too far. So don't do that. But it is pretty cool. You can, and it makes there's a common thing that I see a lot and that I used to do a lot, which is like var x equals an object, and then I'd say x is some computation, like whatever, equals 42. You no longer have to do that. You can just do the sum computation right inside the object definition. Really handy. And I use that particular one a lot. I use the shorthand a lot, and I use the method short one a little less. And that's part of my newspaper code structure, because if this function is really long, tell me what is on this object. So I would extract this to a separate function and just reference it, just like I do the handler. But that is neither here nor there. So anybody have questions about object literals? Yeah.
So if handler is undefined, is that property just not written?
Good question. I think it would actually throw an error. Yeah, it's a runtime error though. Any other questions? Okay, so you can run the test for modules and object literals, and feel free to bug me. I'm not being bugged enough, so yeah, feel free to bug me if you have questions. To turn this thing on. So yeah, default params. Okay, yeah. So for rest parameters, it's basically the last and only the last one parameter can be at rest params, and basically it's just shorthand for saying Y, Z, A, B, C, like forever, except if you can actually accept a dynamic range of parameters, that doesn't really work very well. There are only so many letters in the alphabet. So what this actually outputs to, and we looked at this a little earlier, is it takes the arguments, and it takes all of the arguments after the first ones before the rest params argument. So yeah, so rest params are awesome. And those are the two features about parameters that are super cool. Does anybody have questions about that? Okay. Yeah.
Does the default param define y just at function definition time? So if you modify y, will it change the function?
So the default happens at call time.
It happens at call time. So
That's right.
Unless you overwrite it, it'll always be.
Yeah. So so you can make a function call, and in fact, one of our tests does this. If we can say function get y default, getty default, return, and we'll say call let calls equals 0, and then we'll say calls plus plus, and then we'll say get y default, and then every single time I call this, the y will be a different default. And if I call it enough, eventually one of these will be true. Yep, there we go, right there. So that makes sense. Sweet. Any other questions? Okay, great. Then the next subject, which is actually sort of related, is because it helps you call into functions, is it makes it a lot easier to call functions with an arbitrary number of arguments without having to do .call or .apply, which is really handy. I guess it's, yeah. So, and it allows you to do a lot of other things. So it's the spread operator, and here we have the spread args. It takes x, y, z, and here I have an array, 1, 2, 3. Let's say I got that array from somebody else, and instead of saying that array at index 0, and then comma that array at index 1, and comma that array at index 3 or 2, I can just say ... and it spreads them across the arguments, or the arguments of that function call. Is that like clear as mud? Okay. It will make more sense as you test it and as we continue through these examples. So, like basically, all that it does is it makes it do this. So, and then it makes concatenating arrays really easy. So you can take this array 1 and concatenate it to the end of this array here. So it basically does, if we take it one step at a time, we'll just replace that, or we'll replace array 1, and then we'll remove the actual array portion, and boom, it's the exact same thing. So, whoa, I just lost everything. Okay, and then finally, merging objects. So instead, it actually functions exactly like object.assign. I'm almost positive, actually, let me just double check. Object.assign to object, or actually, we'll take this guy and object 1. And yes, they result in exactly the same thing. And if you look at the compiled output, this piece right here where we're spreading the object properties over uses this underscore extends function, which is assigned to either object.assign if the browser has it, or their own function that basically does the same thing. It's like a polyfill for object.assign. So, yeah, that's that. Does anybody have questions about these 2 features, or 3 features, sort of? Okay, I'll let you loose on the test then. There are some who prefer to have parentheses always. I'm not one of those people, just because I'm hipster, I guess. But I see no problem with not having parameters. I think that's totally legible. But in your tests, I'm not asserting that you are or aren't using parentheses. So do whatever you want. I don't care. But I would recommend that you standardize it on your team so that your code all looks uniform, which makes it easier to read and stuff, although some people disagree with that too, so never mind. So also, in the case that you need to return an object, when you return an object, you need to have braces for the object, right? But in a one-liner function, that means function closure, right? And so now, all of a sudden, like, you're just returning this itself without the braces, which is like totally doesn't make sense. So you add parentheses around that to indicate, no, this is one-liner. This thing inside of the parentheses is what I'm returning. Does that make sense? Okay. Saved you 5 minutes of figuring out what the heck. It does not. So.
It doesn't have any semantic meaning without.
Exactly. Yep. Very good. So, yeah, and actually I should mention that you can very easily just stick that here, but you'll notice the output, if I on the no params, is now null, 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 null. So what basically is happening here is once you put those braces in there, then it's saying, oh, this is not a one-liner. Even if you put it on one line, it's saying, no, this is not a one-liner. And so you have to do an explicit return to get your hi, 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 hi. That make sense? Okay, great. I'm a huge fan of one-liners in some cases. Don't make your one-liners this long. That is not helpful. So just put it on 2 lines. The other thing that is notable, let's see. Well, we kind of talked about statement bodies. So yeah, this, like, if you want to do it on multi-line, you have to have the brackets. If you don't want to have a return statement, one trick to do, like let's say, for example, we wanted to put this on multiple lines, just because it's easier to read for some reason. But by doing this, it, well, actually, let me see 1 second. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I think actually that's the exact same thing. Oh, no, I know what it is. This is a bad example because it already has parentheses. Let's use this example again. So, if I don't have it on a single line, then things work just perfectly. I don't remember what it was that I was going to demonstrate now, so this is what I get for doing stuff that I didn't practice. So, moving right along. So the yeah, to add a statement body, you just add your braces, and boom, you have a statement body. And remember, if you have your braces, you have to do an explicit return. And then lexical this. Who is familiar with what I mean when I say lexical this? Okay, who is familiar with what I mean when I say this is messed up in JavaScript? Okay, so just to do like a quick refresher course on why this is so messed up. If I were not using an arrow function here, let's convert this to a normal function. And we'll say this, and what's wrong here? Oh, and that, right? Am I missing something? Should have just copied the output, huh? Function f, what the junk? Oh, there we go. Okay, so if I wasn't using the arrow function, I don't get lexical this. And so guess what happens when I assign print? When I assign it and then I just call it on its own, I just get this cannot read property friends of undefined. What the? Yeah, or yeah, it was this, right? No, it was this one. Yeah, so craziness. Actually, I don't think in this case I don't even need to assign it to something else because I don't have lexical this in this function either. Then I don't have the safety of my this being bound to the correct context. So let me explain what's going on here. This is actually a little bit more confusing. Let me just create a new one. So we'll say var object is this thing that has a fn function, and this will have a name. I don't know who. What's your name? Jaden? Jacob. Okay. So Jacob, and we'll say return this dot name. So then if I console.log object.fn, call this, and well, now we've got all kinds of broken junk. We'll just get rid of this guy. Okay, so here we're logging out Jacob. Now if I say function is object.function, and then I say console.log function invoked, cannot read name property of undefined. I hate life. So actually, what's interesting, there's one thing that's interesting to note about this whole concept here, is you would not normally see this if you just did it in your browser, unless you had the use strict annotation at the top of your file. And what use strict does is it does several things, but one of the things that it does is it makes it so when you call something without an explicit this, it doesn't bind that this to the window object or the global object, whatever context you're in. It just makes it undefined, which is kind of nice because then you don't wind up with let's say you had an object that was person and they had a location property on it, and then you call this function that has checks for location. That would work just fine, even though it's actually checking the window.location instead of your object's location. So anyway, so ES6 is actually explicit, or it's implied use strict mode, and so I'm not exactly sure how that's going to work with browser implementers, because how are they going to know whether you're in ES6 you are, right? And so I don't know how they're not going to break the web when they implement that. So anyway, but that's the way that it is, and so that's why this is undefined. But the reason that this is undefined and it's not referencing the object is because in JavaScript this refers to the thing on the left side of the dot when the function is being called, and in this case that is nothing, so it's undefined. So lexical this. Sorry, does that make sense? Does anybody have questions about that? Many of us have experienced this and cried about it. So having a lexical this solves the problem, and I will just, you know what, heck with it. I'm just going to reload this frame. Thank you, iframes. And how did that happen? It totally just kept my same old stuff. Okay, I'm going to refresh the browser then. Okay. So here we have the arrow function, and so this is now being lexically bound to the this that is in the closure in which it resides. Lots of words. Let me just show you what it looks like when it's compiled. Then it will instantly make sense. So it is basically creating a variable called underscore this, and it is referencing that one. That is lexical this. So another way to think of it is, oh my gosh, I just went back in my browser. So another way to think of it is you could, I'm actually not sure if this, everything is, if this is exactly, works exactly the same way, but if you're familiar with bind, then this would do the same thing. I'm not sure why Babel doesn't just do this. Maybe it's because of some difference in behavior, but I would expect it would behave the exact same. So anyway, we with the current implementation, even though this is an arrow function now, and so this will work just fine. Because this is not an arrow function, then this will not work fine. Or we'll just say print. So now we're going to get cannot read property friends. And so if you want to have lexical, well, actually, yeah, that's a good thing to point out. You cannot have lexical this on an object, like when you define an object like this. It doesn't, it just doesn't work. So like even if I decided to say no, this is an arrow function, the closure in which this function resides is actually inside of this entire file. This is the closure, and so it's bound to this. So anyway, just something to be aware of. Be careful. There be dragons. So let's go ahead and, yeah, I'll go ahead and ask for questions, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Any questions? Arrow functions are cool. Well, actually, I should mention also, it's not only this that is lexically bound, but also arguments. So inside of here, if I say console.log arguments, you would expect in a normal function that f would be what you log, like Mary and Jane. That is not the case. Arguments is also lexically bound, similar to this. Another one is super, which I think will result in a transpilation error because this isn't a class, but super is also lexically bound. And new.target is also lexically bound, but that's like crazy, so don't worry about that. Yeah, I think that's it. So let me move on to the next thing unless somebody has questions, and then we can go to tests. And we have 15 minutes. We might not get to everything. Actually, you know what? Does anybody have a problem if I just go through the rest of the slides, and then you can go test whatever you want? Okay, let's do that. Okay, so we have classes in JavaScript. Yay! And Angular is totally adopting it. Yay! Okay, so I'm being sarcastic. So we have this class called point, and we have a few things on this point. We have a constructor, and we have a toString method. The constructor is just like you would expect in a normal, prototypical class thing, prototype thing. Oh, and actually, I should point out, classes are nothing special. This is just syntactic sugar. However, using classes can help in performance. I don't know how much, but browsers, when you use classes, browsers can optimize because you're using classes. For example, a class doesn't need a prototype, and so. Excuse me, that is totally not true. Classes do have prototypes. Functions, all functions, when you create a function, it is automatically assigned a prototype. But when classes are mainstream, then browsers can say, the heck with that. If you want to have a prototype, you have to make a class. And so then they don't have to attach a prototype to every function. So that's just one example of classes providing some optimizations. The nice thing about that one is I don't have to use classes, and I still benefit. So that's great. Yeah, there are other optimizations that browser vendors can leverage when you use classes. I'm not totally aware of all of them, but I'm told that they're awesome. So yeah, take that for what it's worth. So yeah, you define your class, and then you have your you can extend other classes. I don't know if you can. I don't think that you can say implements like you can in other languages. Like you can't have an interface. I don't think that would really make sense anyway. Yeah, maybe it would. But yeah, so you can extend, and so in that case you can call super. And oh, one other thing is like you don't need commas. In fact, you can't have commas between your function definitions. And one other thing, you can't use newspaper code structure, which is one of the reasons I hate classes. But that's not a very substantial reason. There are other reasons I don't like them. So yes, that we can new up our color point with the things that our constructor takes. We could add like REST params in here if we wanted. Like all that stuff still works. And we can call toString on it, which actually calls the super toString, and so that references this guy, and then it adds in this color, and so you see it's this thing in green, right? And then it's not only an instance of color point, but it's also an instance of point. And yeah, so that's basically the idea of classes in ES6. Does anybody have questions about classes? A few other things I just remembered. Classes are not hoisted like function declarations are, so just be careful of that. And what was the other thing? Oh, never, ever, ever, ever extend more than like 2 or 3 layers deep. Just don't do it. Your self will thank you for your actions later. Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to sets. Sets are cool too. Sets are like arrays, except they are a little bit different. So here we are adding some items onto a set, and you can see it's chainable, so the add function will just return itself. And so that's handy. And then set has a size property, not a length. And the size here is 2. Can anybody tell me why the size is 2 on this set? Yes. Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Yes, and that's one of the reasons why sets are so cool, is because here we're adding hello twice, and it only, I think it actually ignores this, the second one, so it keeps the original one. And we can see that when we log out our items here with hello being first. So you also have this has. You can determine whether something, whether the set has a property rather than index of is not equal to -1. I think array actually has contains. Oh man, can't help it. Does an array have contains in ES6? That's a good question. Contains? No, maybe it's not implemented yet. Say const thing equals new, or forget that. 1, 2, 3. Then we say console.log thing contains 2. No. How about includes? Ah, yes, includes, which is nice. But in sets you have has, and then with object.keys on a set, you don't get any keys. So you don't get like your 0, 1, 2. They're not indexed the same as arrays are, and so there's no item at index 0. And then yeah, so the way that you pull items out of it is you use the new for of the for of syntax in ES6, which takes an iterable and iterates over its properties. And so set implements iterable. And so do generators, which is kind of cool, and a couple other new things. And so we basically all I'm doing here is I'm iterating over the set and pushing the items onto the items array so that we can see what the items are inside of there. I don't know actually whether there's a way to just say, hey set, what do you got? Should probably look that up. If somebody wants to look that up, that'd be cool. But yeah, that's sets. Does anybody have questions about sets? Okay, great. So next is maps. Maps are like sets, but for they are not like sets for objects. They are totally different. So maps allow you to make an object sort of that can have non-string keys, so like numbered keys or objects as keys, and that's pretty handy for having sort of private data. So yeah, we create a new map. We set the hello property or key, or I don't even know. Yeah, key, I guess, to 42, and then we have this object called that has a foo bar, which is super cool, and we set that to 34. Then we log out the m.get with the object key, same reference, then we can get the value. But that's the only way that we can get the value. Sorry, I keep like slipping. That is not the only way we can get the value. You can get the value through reflection, but like it's the only sane way to get the value without doing reflection stuff. But that's why we have weak maps. So anyway, yeah. So we set the hello property, but we can't actually get it's not like a real object where you have the hello property on it. You have to get it using the get call. It also doesn't have any keys, and it also implements iterable. So that's how we get these items out of it. Anybody have questions on maps? And there are tests, and you can go implement those. Finally, we have weak maps, and there's actually also weak sets that behave very similarly, except for sets. So a weak map is actually really cool. So it's just like a map, except it has a weak reference to its properties. Let me try to explain why that's so cool. I'll show you the test. If we go to the weak map test, actually I'll show you the implemented test. So here we have a person class, and we want to make all of their data private. So the way that this used to be accomplished is you'd have like my person, and they'd have a name is like foo, and you just say by convention anything with an underscore you cannot touch. But of course everybody does, and that doesn't work at all. So weak maps, or maps, are a solution to private data, but weak maps are a solution to a memory leak issue. So with a map, you say, hey, this object is the key for this value. And then let's say along or like through the process of your application, that object is or that value is no longer needed, and nobody is referencing it except for this map. And so now you have this memory leak issue where like the longer people use your applications, the longer this private data gets properties set to it, even though nobody's referencing the person that it's for anyway. So the weak map basically does not maintain or does not enforce the garbage collector from just trashing stuff. So if nobody is referencing this object except for weak map, then it will get garbage collected. Does that make sense? So it's pretty awesome. I haven't had a use case for any of these that I've noticed or that I've realized, but I could see how they could be very valuable. So, yep, that's that. So does anybody have any questions about anything at all? Yes?
Maps, is there any limitation that we need to have valid value or undefined can do as a value?
Yep. Yep. So we could say if we set this to undefined, then when we get it, it doesn't print it out, but I wonder if we could say, well, yeah, it doesn't print it out, but yeah, totally legit. Yeah.
And so for the object key, does it have to be that exact memory reference, or can you redefine an object that looks exactly the same?
Yep, it has to be exact same memory object, which is why, or what makes it an actual protected thing. It's also, because it doesn't implement iterable, we can't for of it, and so therefore we can't get any properties out of it. It also doesn't have a size property on it either, which, yeah, makes it like, if you just look at it, you're like, this is totally a worthless object. It actually, it's very valuable in some cases. So
is that true for it has to be the same object for
yeah, for maps as well.
maps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, weak and solid. Strong, yeah. Okay, sweet. Well, I apologize that I didn't leave enough time for you guys to, or for y'all to do the test for everything. We still have 5 minutes, so you can work on that. When we get back, it's app time, and hopefully this will wake you up, and I will do better than that kitten does. So feel free to stay. I will remain for at least 5 more minutes to help answer any questions about the tests.